Welcome to the Experience Strategy Podcast, where we talk to customers and experts about how to create products and services that feel like time well spent. And now, here are your hosts, experienced strategists, Dave Norton and Aransas Savas.
Welcome to the Experience Strategy Podcast. I'm Aransas Savas.
And I'm Dave Norton.
And today we are going deep into turnaround mode. And who better to explore this mode with than Lisa Gable, who is a former U.S. ambassador and the best-selling author of Turnaround, Changing Course When Things Are Going South. Lisa has had a tremendous career turning around businesses, teams, nonprofits, political campaigns, government projects, and generally, wherever she goes, finding innovative human solutions to big, hairy problems. Lisa, thank you so much for being here with us.
Well, thanks for having me. It's so good to see you guys and to have a chance to talk.
Yes, we're excited to bring your voice into this conversation. So this episode, Lisa, is part of our series on modes. And when we talk about modes, we're talking about the mindsets and behaviors that people get into to temporarily get things done. So let's start with the mindset side. When do people, companies, governments, you name it, realize they need a turnaround? What are the symptoms that a turnaround is in order?
Well, there's so many of them, so I'll try to narrow it down. But really, what we have to look at is a couple of things. One is revenue. Revenue is the most obvious. When you have a drop in revenue, and it doesn't matter if you're in government, business, and philanthropy, you need money in order to get stuff done. And if you don't have money coming in, you can't get much done. Secondarily is that they recognize that they're spending more than they're taking in. Again, a very obvious point. But I think one of the factors that people fail to fully recognize is how much time it's taking them to get something done. And what I mean by that is that basic concept of economic opportunity cost foregone. And what I mean is that when someone is spending so many resources and it's absorbing so much time in order to move something over the finish line, then you fundamentally have something wrong with the economics and the structure of that entity. And perhaps it shouldn't exist as it currently operates today.
What a telling symptom there, right? Because it is the foundational operational construct there. Without these resources, we cannot continue. So what mindsets do entities need to adopt in order to be successful at turnarounds in your experience?
Well, what you need to do is be open to really challenging every assumption that you have. Sometimes what we do is that we look at current year, we look at maybe a few years back, but rarely do we remember to go back and actually look multiple years in advance. And the reason I mention that, and you see it a lot with government programs, is that you build something in order to solve a problem. And that thing was built at a moment in time when technology and communication was of a particular construct. The other is that there are other players who may not have been in the field at the time that you built that thing. And if you don't go back and actually revisit, why did we start this to begin with? And I tell people, especially in nonprofits, I go, pull out your bylaws. Go read what you told people you were originally going to do, because you've been zigging and zagging and going around various hurdles, and all of a sudden you're completely off course. And so you may not recognize that the reality is that the organization no longer needs to exist, or the way in which it currently operates, it can't continue in that mode, or it may be time to partner with other people, and that may not be part of your DNA, but it has to be part of your DNA moving forward, because you need to focus on job one, which is the whole reason you were created in the first place, and let other people take other things on that may align with your goals and objectives, but that won't drag you down as you're trying to accomplish your number one thing that you have to get done that day.
Amen. Here's to focusing, right? And getting very clear about who we are in the world and letting that drive how we are in the world. I'd love to hear an example from your experience where you've seen that done effectively or ineffectively.
Well, I've seen it many times, and sometimes people realize it sooner rather than later. But most recently, I was involved with the turnaround of a medical research organization. And that organization was formed because it actually had combined and become a merged entity with a grassroots organization. But the reality is the cost of grassroots, the amount of time it takes to do grassroots, from things like walks, being able to facilitate those walks and have people raise money in that process, all of a sudden they were pulling resources away from research in order to accommodate requirements and obligations that they had on the books. And so what we had to do is do an assessment. And what we recognized is that these walks were costing us $2 million a year, and they were only bringing in $1 million a year. That was sign number one. And so the question was asked, well, can you make it more cost effective? But the reality is the people time it took in order to facilitate that number of volunteers doing that activity, which was basically bringing in a low price point, actually had a much higher cost to it. And so that's something that we had to end, and we had to do so by being very transparent with everybody that was involved. People were obviously emotionally attached to these walks because they were patients or they were the parents of patients, and they wanted to raise awareness. So we had to reassure them that we would do everything possible to continue to maintain the purpose, which was fundraising, keeping people involved, keeping the issue top of mind, but we were going to do a completely different construct.
That's such a great point, too, about retaining the purpose in a way that is fully aligned with the brand or business mission and vision and the economics. And so rather than compromising on that, which frankly is a really costly proposition, it takes a long time to get passion and purpose and loyalty that is deeply held and emotional. And so to find ways to retain that through your storytelling while you turn around the business itself.
Sometimes you have to be willing to let stuff go.
Yeah. And that's probably, I'd guess, one of the hardest parts for these businesses, especially older companies in particular, or older. I'm thinking about governments as I say that. And I think, that is probably some of the systemic issues there have been happening over not just decades, but centuries. And so undoing some of those patterns has got to be really complex. I know you're a process thinker and a big fan of teaching through process. So let's talk about the action of turnaround. What are the behaviors of this mode?
Well, I have a 4-step process that I like people to use. One is visualize the future. And what I mean by that, if you could wave your magic wand today and just say, that's what we want it to look like, then move towards that direction. And to some degree, you almost have to burn the whole thing down. And I don't mean that literally. I'm not telling you to light a match and torch this organization as it currently exists, but you have to think about it that way. If we were starting this business from scratch, how would we build it? And you mentioned government programs. If we were building some government programs from scratch today, based on where technology is today and our ability to get a product to market, obviously a service to the taxpayer, would we design it that way? And then the next step in the process is that you need to build a path to the future. And the only way you can do that is audit the past, figure out what's working and what's not working, and get rid of those things. Because by getting rid of things and focusing on jobs 1, 2, and 3, job 1 being the most important thing you need to do, and jobs 2 and 3 are your, what I call your, support cast on the stage, that is going to be how you then do step number 3, which is aligning your processes with others, developing partnerships, building that path forward by linking arms and utilizing the best technology that's out there today, the best services that are out there today, letting things go. And when you do that, you're ready to move forward very quickly. And I say move forward with speed, confidence, agility, and heart. And what I mean by the heart piece is that you have to have empathy, because change affects people. We know it affects people. And so you have to be willing to have that conversation and acknowledge that you're going through a change. There will be an upheaval. Someone may lose their job, but the reality is you don't have any choice except to make those hard decisions.
Yeah, I think again the winning hearts and minds piece of this is probably the place that best leverages your deep roots in diplomacy. So, how do you bring the lessons that you learned from your work as an ambassador, your work in bipartisan councils into the work that you do with companies?
Basically, I use shuttle diplomacy. And what I describe as shuttle diplomacy is physically getting out there and meeting with as many people as you can who are going to be impacted by the changes. Those people may be your customers. They may be your partners, your business partners. They may be some of your supply chain partners, or they may be people within your own company. But to the degree that you can have individual conversations or conversations with small groups, hear their point of view, hear what their pain points are, and describe to them how the changes you're going to make will help alleviate the pain, the burden that they're currently feeling. Because by doing that, by framing it within the construct that you're going to design something that takes their pain points into account, that's going to be the way that you get people cheering for you. I always tell people it's like that Verizon commercial, where the guy's standing there and there are all these people around him. Or maybe it's like a race, you got all these people applauding when you come over the finish line. Well, nobody's going to applaud or show up at your race unless you actually bring them into the process and talk them through why you're making the changes you're making.
Yeah, I keep thinking as you're talking about that old adage, change never happens until something like the change of staying the same is greater than the pain of changing. And I think what you're doing is you're helping them perceive both the possibility that exists in change and to realize the struggle that's happening in staying the same.
It is. It's always the biggest challenge. You don't want to do something to a person. If nobody wants something done to them, they at least want to be acknowledged as to what their role in whatever the solution set is, what their role in your future state is. If you can give them a role in your future state, it may not be working with you, but it may be working within the environment, that same industry that they're currently involved with, and you become a partner in helping them to get to that next place, then you're really doing something that's quite wonderful. And all of a sudden, people are very excited and they may go on to new jobs. But if those jobs are within your circle, then they're going to be still supporting your initiatives.
I love that word support. So when I think about turnaround, I'm struck by how many similarities it has with the work that we do in transformation. And our work is very much rooted in the same places, right? we can't transform or turn around through minor tweaks. It must be overhauls and it must be end to end. And you use that word support, and we talk a lot about guiding transformation. So talk to us about what that looks like in your experience. How does one effectively guide others down that path?
You need to link arms as you climb those mountains. And one thing that I love about the work that you and Dave and those in your group do is you talk a lot about collaboration. And what I want people to understand is that collaboration doesn't necessarily mean that you have to live in the same entity. As I spoke about before, you need to start focusing. The only way for you to achieve utter transformation is if you focus on job number one. But what you want to do is find other people who may be aligned with your mission, who may have a product or a service or an activity. And I tell people, I'm not saying commingle dollars, I'm not saying set up a joint venture. What I'm recommending is that you have a process of management by objectives where you may be integrating someone else's objectives into your own, and they may be integrating yours into theirs, because that's the way that you'll work together. I had the opportunity to have my first business experience working at Intel Corporation during the early 90s. And the one thing that just sticks out in my mind is when Intel, IBM, and Microsoft went to IT managers and sold them on a suite of products. Each of them owned different aspects of the solution, but they joined arms together. And when those Intel, Microsoft sales forces showed up together, and Intel, IBM sales force showed up together, that was very powerful, because at that point they could answer every single question that the person buying their services would have. They were giving them the assurance that we're all in this together, and we're going to make sure that you have, better, faster, cheaper ways of doing your business.
I think one of the most sort of profound and awesome turnarounds that you've been a part of that I know of, and that really brings to mind the true power of collaboration, is the work you did with calorie reduction. Can you tell us that story?
I did. I was very fortunate to be recruited by Ingenuity and 15 of her peers. Inger was the CEO of PepsiCo at the time, to help them unstick a major initiative that was mired in acrimony. And what I am talking about is that the food and beverage companies were basically being accused of peddling sugar and fat to consumers who love to eat. And as a result, we had a national obesity problem. And what they needed to do is they needed to come up with a solution, a way that they could be part of the solution that would also change the dialogue with public health and regulators. The companies made a decision that they would commit to reducing calories in the marketplace. That was something they could all do. We had looked at a number of different variables, looked at how chocolate was made and cereal and bread and all the different products that these companies made, from Nestle to Coca-Cola to Campbell's Soup. And what we recognized is that calories was the unifying factor. If you reduced calories, you could reduce sugar and fat. And if you reduce sugar and fat and people ate those same foods, they would be receiving less calories. So therefore, they would be able to maintain their weight. We made a commitment to reduce 1.5 trillion calories in the marketplace over a 5-year period of time. Ultimately, because we had so many fierce competitors, we had Pepsi against Coke, and we had General Mills against Campbell on soup, and we had Kellogg against General Mills. They were all competing as fast as they could. I tell people it was like you had Michael Phelps swimming in a lane. Everybody else was also breaking records. And ultimately, because of competition around the same goal, we reduced 6.4 trillion calories in the American diet 3 years in advance of our goal, beating our goal by 400%. 99% of products sold during that time period were lower calorie products. We met the consumer where we needed to meet them. We had a major goal and a big vision that we all operated around and that we shared together. We used common language to get there. We used a verification process to ensure that public health felt confident that we'd done what we promised to do. And we were actually able to see reductions in obesity across certain socioeconomic targets that we had identified in advance.
Wow. It really is staggering to think about the number of stakeholders, the powerful use of both competition and collaboration in complementary ways, and then the long-term effects of this, and how much that now has become a part of the fabric of how we market foods and how we both receive them as consumers. Now, I know you did something actually pretty similar with a totally different organization when you went in to lead the World's Fair, another place where it seemed like these were pretty complex problems. Some deep issues existed there. So talk to us there about the role of collaboration and how turnaround worked in that setting.
Sure. I was recruited by President Bush to be the U.S. Ambassador and Commissioner General to the World Expo in Aichi, Japan in 2004 and 2005. What no one had mentioned to me is that the person who went before me had set up hidden bank accounts, put their family on the payroll, and been investigated by the FBI and been indicted in Congress. So nobody told me that piece of the equation. So
I can't imagine why that wasn't part of their sales pitch.
I don't know either. And so as I had gone on CNN and I'd been with Colin Powell, and we'd signed the agreement between the United States and Japan on the U.S. side of the equation, and I was headed to the airport and getting on an airplane, and all of a sudden I get this phone call from the State Department lawyers. I'm like, hey, I'm getting on the airplane, signing that agreement in Japan, in Tokyo tomorrow morning. And they said, yeah, there's a problem. we don't know how we can pay for this, because when Congress made a decision after everything that went on with your predecessor to defund this effort and go to a completely privatized process, nobody really calculated in how the government would pay for its portion of the equation, which is you. And we basically went through the processes that I always went through. I tell people, this is my story called the $10 tuna fish sandwich. I get to Tokyo, and since I'm paying for it, I looked at my husband, he goes, well, pay for it. You got to sign that agreement. You can't embarrass everybody tomorrow by not showing up. I get to Tokyo, one of the most expensive cities in the world, and I found these $10 tuna fish sandwiches on the Ginza. And everybody else is out there having fine wine from other countries and big extravagant expenses. And I wasn't. They were drinking whiskey. I was drinking water and tea. But what I did is I used my process. And I did an analytical process where I ranked and rated all the activities that had been done in World's Fairs in the past by the United States. And then we went through and we evaluated the cost of those. And we identified what were going to be jobs 1, 2, and 3. And what we knew is that we had to perform from a diplomatic perspective. We had to actually fulfill our commitment and show up and have millions of visitors come to our pavilion. But most importantly, for the American taxpayer, my job was to create jobs for them, to drive foreign direct investment for them. So when we ranked and rated the activities, all that was going to be paid for by private funds, we then evaluated and got rid of stuff. We got rid of a lot of stuff. We said, we're not going to have the fanciest pavilion. Instead, we're going to focus on bringing governors from the United States, manufacturers, travel and tourism people from Japan into the same rooms together, and we're going to focus on signing agreements. And we ended up signing billions of dollars worth of agreements in auto manufacturing, all the supply chain of CAD/CAM, paint. Secondarily, we ensured that even when we did a diplomatic event or a cultural event, which was a requirement of our responsibility, that we piggybacked it onto something that would create jobs. And so the perfect example of that was travel and tourism. And ultimately, we ended up producing the only U.S. pavilion that was under budget in 175 years, going back to the Eiffel Tower in Paris. And at the same time, we were able to go to Congress and say, not only did we stick with the rules, but we drove X billion dollars worth of foreign direct investment into the United States. These are all the jobs that were created. And so we delivered on our promise, job one of what we had to do as basically on behalf of the United States with foreign country.
Really extraordinary. Amazing. And I think these two lessons of job one and understanding stakeholder needs just seem so central to everything that you do. And so as we start to pivot this conversation into what this means for experienced strategists, some of our listeners may be working at PepsiCo, they may be working at Campbell's Soup, they may be working at the Pentagon, but most aren't. Some of them are running their mom and pop pizza shop. Yep. Others are running their marketing consultancy. I suspect the lessons hold true for them.
Lisa, as I listen to you, one of the things that I think we need to remind our listeners is that the reason that you create experience strategies is to create economic value. And I've seen over the last 10 years just a proliferation in new channels, new solutions, companies adding on. We may very well be in a recession right now, and companies need to be asking themselves, do we need all of that? And I think that that's one of the key things that you're reminding of us. When a company goes through choppy weather, difficulties, they begin to struggle. They begin to look around and they say, how can we retain everything that we're currently doing? And what they should be asking themselves is, do all of these experiences really still matter to the customer? Or are we doing things that are legacy things that we need to really let go of? And I love this idea that there are certain modes that in a B2B situation that companies get into that are transformational modes for the company. You've talked about a very painful one for organizations. Turnarounds are no fun at the beginning. Toward the end, they start to make sense. But it's kind of like a phoenix, right? You know, you have to die in the fire and then be reborn again in a very different way. It's very different from other modes that companies get into. Companies love to be in strategizing mode. You know, they love that, but they hate to be in crisis mode. And I think you've given us some really good things to think about that actually apply directly to experiences as well. So I'm going to use your language, and I'm going to replace the word company with experiences. So if we're going to, one of the first things you said is, if we're going to build the business, how would we build it from scratch? We could say the exact same thing about all of the experiences that we're creating. If we were going to build this experience from scratch, how would we build it? What would be the job that we needed to get done? That's the important thing to be asking. When a company is in that kind of mode, we need to eliminate the things that don't matter anymore. And then we need to, as you said, we need to assess, get rid of the channels, get rid of the solutioning that we don't need anymore, and we need to build a path forward. The only way to know that for sure is to know the job that the customer is really trying to get done. I think that's, we've talked about that Aransas on all of our podcasts. And Lisa, you weren't in any way prompted to say that. I think there's some triangulation, some confirmation from your years of experience of how important it is to understand the job that we need to get done. The other thing that I heard you say that I just love is this idea of, once you know where you're going and you're starting to move forward, you move forward with speed, agility, and heart. And that's part of the turnaround mode. That's part of what you're trying to do. As experienced strategists, we often talk about, we've got to empathize with the customer. And what I think you've done for us is you've taken that to a different place. You've said the leaders need to be the ones who are reaching out on a one-to-one basis to the different constituents and understanding where they're at, and then explaining how the new model is going to really help them. That's a different level of empathy than what we typically talk about as experienced strategists, where we're like, do we know what they feel? Do we know what they think? Do we know how they act? It's important. But when you're in turnaround mode, you need a leader that is going to be able to provide that heart and talk maybe to the masses, maybe talk on a one-to-one basis. That's part of the turnaround mode. That's part of the overall experience that you need to create. I think about what Johnson & Johnson did many years ago when they had their struggles with Tylenol. They were able to recreate trust because they had a leadership that said, hey, we get it. We understand where we're at, and we're not going to hide from it. So I see a lot of powerful stuff.
Yeah. It feels like there are three key skills that come into this leadership, and it's deep listening, it's clarity of vision, and it's courage to make new messes, right? Like, we have to be willing to lay it all out, make a mess, and then regroup, restructure, edit, toss out what's no longer needed, and put all of our energy and attention and focus onto what's needed most.
How many of us are still doing, you talked about those walks that particular research group was doing, and I'm sure it was a meaningful experience. I think it was probably very emotional, very powerful for everyone involved, but at what cost? And we always have to ask ourselves, how, that question, like, at what cost are we creating these experiences?
So, Lisa, as an experienced strategist yourself, which really you are from the leader's seat, and even from the external perspective brought in to expand the internal perspective, What do you most hope that our listeners, experienced strategists, and all sorts of companies will take from your life's work into their life's work?
We're at a complex time right now, and I think that it has been the most unpredictable 3 years that we may have experienced. Normally, we go through economic downturns, and we have a very typical way back. But with COVID, we haven't rebooted the economy the way that we hope we would. And we also have geopolitical unrest. And so what I hope leaders who are listening understand is you have to go through these steps. Nobody said they're going to be easy. They're not going to be pleasant. None of us like to do it, but we have to do it. And remembering, secondly, that these activities, what we're doing, what we are changing, will impact people. And so you're running as fast as you can. And I recognize you only have so much time in the day. But that one well-placed phone call, doing a pre-brief with a group of customers before you make a public announcement, that will save you so much time and energy in the future. Just taking the time to acknowledge that people are going to have something they like go away, and being able to be very upfront with them will enable you to make that announcement without people in the background creating noise, without attacking you online. Because otherwise, if you don't take these human steps, unhappy people are unhappy. They're going to say something. And yet at the same time, you're also creating a partnership where everyone owns in the success. Everyone can define a narrative that puts them and their position in the best light. I had a friend recently, and I posted about this today, who lost her job, but she was told in advance what was going on. And so her narrative was, yep, I lost my job. I need to go get another job. I wish the best for my former company because they were great people and I want them to do good things. And so she was able to control her narrative. And that's really what people care about. They just don't want to have stuff done to them. Nobody wants to be surprised.
Well said. Well said. Well said. Dave, any last thoughts from you for the experienced strategists out there?
Lisa, I've loved getting to know you over the last year or so, and it is just so fun. And I've just learned so much from this session. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks so much for having me.
I suspect everyone listening to this is going to want to know more. So where do we find more about Lisa Gable and your book?
You can go to lisagable.com, and also I'm on LinkedIn, Instagram, on Facebook as Lisa Gable Official. Feel free to send me a note on LinkedIn. I'm very responsive. I love helping and talking to people about resources that are out there that can help them solve their problems. So stay in touch.
Awesome. Thank you so much. May we always all be in a turnaround mode. It's really when we get stuck and sitting still that we lose relevance, we lose purpose, we lose energy. And whether it's in our own personal lives or in great big companies or little tiny ones, we take into account these wonderful lessons. Thank you, Lisa, for sharing your extraordinary journey and experience with us.
Well, thank you for having me. I do appreciate it.
To all of you out there, thank you for listening to the Experience Strategy Podcast. Keep telling us what you like, what you want more of and less of, and what modes you're most curious about.
Thank you for listening to the Experience Strategy Podcast. If you're having fun nerding out with us, please follow and share wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Find more episodes and continue the conversation with us at experiencestrategypodcast.com.